Okay, good evening everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us this evening as we are broadcasting from Deerfield Beach, Florida this week, and from the home of Avi Stern, Mr. and Mrs. Avi Stern. And as always, we begin with Hakar Satayv to TorahAnytime.com. We know that TorahAnytime.com just made its major fundraiser, and we hope people participated in it. We're grateful to them for their giving us a platform to teach Torah all over the world, and we're grateful to Kol HaLashon for its global reach, and Torah Communications Network, and YouTube, and our Zoomers, and our subscribers. Tonight, we are sponsored by Berich Goldwasser and family. Eli Nishmas, his wife's grandfather, Moshe ben Gershon, whose yahrzeit is the 21st of Shvat. Neshama should have an aliyah, he should be a Melech Yosher for his family, for all of us and all of Klal Yisrael. We also have a virtual sponsor, Anonymous, who's a co-sponsor. We thank him as well. Before I start to teach about this very important parsha, just a reflection. I am on a trip in Florida, and we spent 3 days in Orlando. And when we were in Orlando, we went to SeaWorld. And in SeaWorld, we went into an aquarium where you see stingrays. I watched for about 10 minutes, stingrays going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Then I watched a school of fish, a small fish, going around in circles, constantly going around in circles, like a dreidel, but a dreidel that doesn't stop for 10 minutes, constantly, the whole school of fish going round, 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 round. I saw a dolphin show where the dolphins, and then later we went to see them underwater, and the dolphins were going down, coming up, getting some air from the surface, going down, coming up, going down, coming up, going down, coming up. And I have to tell you that it made a very big impression upon me how lucky we are. How lucky we are that we don't live meaningless lives. It's really an amazing thing that we have purpose. And right away I thought to myself of the bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem Chaynein Hadas. Hashem, you gave me knowledge that I live with purpose. I thought about the bracha of Anoy Sein La Sechvi Vina. One of the meanings of Sechvi is the mind. You gave the mind understanding La'havchin Bein Yom Bein Loila, to know the difference between day and night. I thought about Havdalah. Im ein das Havdalah minayin. If we don't have das, we don't know how to make any differences. Everything is the same. But while I was thinking this, I also want to reflect that when I was coming to Florida, I was on the plane, and sitting next to me was actually a gentleman that was traveling from Germany. And I had, Baruch Hashem, my Gemara open, and I was preparing the daf, and he had his phone, and he was playing solitaire. And from my peripheral vision, I saw that he kept on losing. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5. He kept on losing. So I commented to him, "It's not your lucky day." So he said to me, "Oh, this is all random." but it's a way to kill time. And when he told me that, I thought to myself the contrast about, we have a Mishnah, Yofa Shah Achas Ba'olam Hazeh Yoiser Mikol Chayei Ha'olam Haba. One moment of this world is more than all of the afterlife. Why? Because in the afterlife we can't do mitzvahs anymore. Meisim Chofshim and mitzvahs. The dead are free of mitzvahs. But here, every moment we could do a mitzvah. Every moment. You're sitting, if you think to yourself about Hashem, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of Es Hashem Alikecha Tira. Every moment we could do a mitzvah. Every moment. We could do a mitzvah by not letting our eyes roam where they shouldn't go. But every moment we could do a mitzvah. We could think about Torah. We could say a Pittel Tillim by heart and have in mind the soldiers in Eretz Yisrael. Every moment. By us, there's no such thing. We're so magnificently fortunate, and we have to thank Hashem for this. Then I saw something else. There was a dolphin show. Now they got the dolphins to, jump up and down and do flips, right? They got them to, hold the performer's flipper, the person's flip. The person held the dolphin's flipper. Every time the dolphin did what they were supposed to, they had a bucket and they would throw the dolphin a little fish. Every time. And if the dolphin wasn't performing, they threw another fish to get it moving. And it showed me the power of food. Because we humans are the same way. Chazal tell us, the road to a man's heart is through his stomach. Now that, you'll say, so Rabbi Weiss, what you're saying is we're behemoths. But the fact of the matter is that it says by Yitzchak, Vayehav Yitzchak es Esav ki tzayid befiv. Yitzchak loved Esav, and Rashi says one pshat of ki tzayid befiv is because he hunted for his mouth. He served Yitzchak delectable venison. He prepared for him a delicious grilled hanger steak. He made for him succulent chops. Now, isn't that a little odd? Yitzchak was Pachad Yitzchak. Right? The Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the of Avodah. Yitzchak represents din. And now we say that Yitzchak loved Esav because Esav was his personal chef, because he satisfied Yitzchak's stomach. What's the Torah doing? It sounds embarrassing. And the answer is the Rabbeinu Shalom is telling us that this is human nature. That food generates Ava. That's why Rabbi Reuven Feinstein said that before you teach the children a Ramban, the girls a Ramban, make sure you teach them how to cook. We have to make sure that our daughters, we always encourage our daughters to know how to cook. If they could, to know how to bake. It's very good. Because, sometimes a wife, she has some flaws. But if she cooks for her husband, it causes him to overlook those flaws. And when I saw it in front of my eyes, I saw how they kept on throwing the fish to the dolphins. I mean, that's a dramatic illustration and exhibition, but the talent and the effort for a woman to make good food for her husband is a very big plus in Shalom Bayis. And because of that, when she makes the food, she's bringing Shechina into her home. You know, when the Kahanim made the menachos in the Beis Hamikdash, so we learn in the Torah, they mixed the fine flour with the oil, and they sifted the flour many times. It's a whole procedure. With these Kahanim, they could have been learning Chak, they could have been learning Zohar. But this was their Avodas Hashem. A woman that cooks and realizes that she is being mekarev the lave of her husband, that's what we learn from Yitzchak. It generates Ava. This is a very important lesson. All right, let's get to the parsha. Ve'ela mishpotim asher tosim lifneihem. These are the laws which you should place before them. And Rashi says this tells us the very important injunction that you must bring your case to a Jewish court and not to Erkoy Shel Goyim, and not to a Goyish court. And Rashi says even if the Goyish court judges in the same laws as the Jewish court, you're still not allowed to go to the Goyish court because it's a Chilul Hashem, it's a desecration of Hashem that you choose to go to a Goyish court instead of a Jewish court. Now, one of the reasons why we always go to a Jewish court is because Elohim nitzav badas el. In an Erlich Jewish court, the presence of Hashem is in their midst, and Hashem is guiding them. Now, sometimes a person wonders. A person brings his friend to Bezdin, and Bezdin rules against him. But he knows that his friend is lying. So he's tempted to say that the Bezdin is a crooked Bezdin. You have to know, if it's an Erlich Bezdin, then because Hashem is in the Bezdin, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. The Zohar says, Eila mishpatim asher tosim lifneihem, dahi soida de Gilgula. This is the secret of Gilgul, which means that sometimes Bezdin will rule against you even though you're right. Because in another Gilgul, you owe this person's Gilgul money. And Hashem has orchestrated it this way. And that's why if you went to a Bezdin of Goyim, it wouldn't happen that way. It's only in a Bezdin Shel Yisrael where Hashem is there, so Hashem sometimes orchestrates things that we don't understand. But I wanted to tell you something else. The Apterov, this is 200 years ago, the Apterov, Zechet Tzadik Levracha, Zchus Yagen Aleinu, one of the officials, one of the big officials of his city, came over to him and asked him, you know, I think that our judiciary system is a lot more safer than yours. You see, we have that each person, each litigant has a lawyer and carefully goes through all of his arguments and skillfully argues on his behalf. It's not that two people that don't have training, but we have lawyers on each side. And then after the judge rules, it could go to 2 or 3 appeals. By the time the process is finished, it's more likely that truth will be achieved. You have it 1, 2, 3, the Beis Din makes a decision. How could that be good? So the Abder Rav looked at him and he said, let me tell you a parable. What happened is the wolf, the Zev, the wolf caught a lamb, a sheep. I was going to take it home for dinner, but he was met up with the lion. And the lion said, look, I'm the king of the animals. I declare that I want the sheep. But he agreed that they should go to the cleverest animal, the fox, for a decision. So the fox said, the wolf found it first. But you have a point that you are the king of the forest. You should split it. The fox looked, he divided it, and he saw that one half was a little bigger than the other, so he nibbled a little bit. And he saw the other half was bigger, he nibbled a little bit. He kept on nibbling until there was nothing left. He says, that's what happens with your lawyers. One lawyer nibbles, the next lawyer nibbles, another lawyer nibbles, and then another. Then there's an appeal, there's more nibbling. By the time it's finished, there's nothing left. I have to tell you, Rabbi Say, this is not to paint all lawyers with one paintbrush, but there's many situations where there are families that are feuding over Yerusha, over inheritance, where by the time the lawyers finish with them, there's almost no Yerusha left. And the same thing is true with a divorce that's not done in an equitable fashion. Each side's lawyers say, you shouldn't settle for this. No, I wouldn't settle for this. You shouldn't settle for this. And at $300 an hour or more, in some cases it could be $2,000 an hour, very quickly there's no money left. The Abder Rav said this 200 years ago, and how true this is even more so today. V'chi yiftach ish bar. If a man opens up a pit. So I want to share with you a story about the Chofetz Chaim. This is a really fascinating story about the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim was walking in the street, and he came across a piece of paper that he thought was shemus. He thought it was a piece from a Chumash or from a Mishnayos. So he bent down, he picked it up, and then he saw it was just a receipt. So he dropped it. But then this venerable sage bent down and picked it up again. And he explained to the people that were with him, you see, the piece of paper, when I picked it up, I acquired it. Even if I don't dig a bar, but if I uncover it, it's my responsibility. So here too, as soon as I picked up the piece of paper, I acquired it. When I let it drop back down, it was mine. So now if the next person comes and bends down thinking it's shemus, I caused him to waste his time. And if he's old, it hurts for him to bend down, I caused him to bend down. I'm not allowed to do that. That's considered making a bar. When I saw this Chofetz Chaim, it really made me think about people that drop wrappers on the floor in shul, or tissues on the floor. Besides the fact that that's not es mikdoshi tiro, that's not having the proper respect for our sanctuary. It also means that you're causing the person who does bend down to bend down and pick it up. Or at the very least, you're costing that person time. Here again, the Chavetz Chaim made a mention that by letting it drop, I'm going to cost somebody the time to pick it up like I did. And then he'll find it's also not shameless. I'm going to cost somebody time. It's true, it's a second. But the Chavetz Chaim, a second is a lot. It's a lot. This parsha has the very important Torah command, midvar sheker tirchak. From a matter of falsehood, you should distance yourself. I made a bracha already, Rabbi Yisai. This is the only place in the Torah where we find a siyag, a safeguard, is part of the biblical mitzvah. We all know that there is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, v'asu siyag la Torah. You should make a fence around the Torah. So, for example, by the Nazir, it says in Masechtas Nazir, Leich, leich, schar, schar. We tell the Nazir, go, take a circuitous route. El karmecha leisikrab. Don't come near a vineyard. In other words, have harchakas. We know by Nida that there's harchakas, that the couple doesn't pass one thing to another, right? If they're going to sit and eat together, they put something that's not usually there in between them, all as a harchaka, as a fence. But here, the Torah doesn't say like by murder, lo sirtzach. It doesn't say like by adultery, lo sinaf. Here, it says midvar sheker tirchak. From a matter of lying, you should distance yourself. This means that you should make a harchaka midaraisa. It's biblical to stay far away from lying. Now let me explain to you the concept of why this is so important. Because if a person accepts upon himself the midah of truthfulness, he's going to have to live a completely different life. So you'll say, what are you talking about? We're talking about being truthful, not lying. What do you mean a completely different life? So here's Chaim. He gets out of work at 6 o'clock. His wife knows that it takes him 45 minutes to get home. The top's an hour. So she's ready with dinner at 7. Now Chaim really wants to stop off by his friend Shimon and shoot the breeze a little bit, and unwind a little bit. Now, if he could tell his wife, I missed the bus, that's why I'm late. Or, the boss gave us a last-minute assignment, and that's why I'm late. So then he could stop by Shimon and bum around a little bit. But if he can't tell his wife a fictitious story because he adheres to midvar sheker tirchak, then he's going to come home on time. That's living a life without lying. It's a different life. And you have to know, we learned it in tonight's daf. Gemara tells us, in tonight's daf in Avodah Zarah, daf Samach Daled, the Gemara tells us that the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah was causing the Jews terrible, terrible havoc. It was claiming the lives of many Jews. So the Chachamim prayed that we're not able to withstand Avodah Zarah, that Hashem should take away the Yetzer Hara. And Nafal Piska Mishamayim, a Piska, a note fell down from Shemayim that said Emes. So the Gemara says, Chaysamay shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Emes. We see from here that the signature of Hashem is Emes. What does it mean, a signature? You know, in my day, if somebody saw that a poor person was carrying a letter signed by Rav Moshe, that letter bore great weight. If you want to know if something is godly, it has to be true. It has to be true. You know, I remember that when I was by I gave a shir for Invei Agefen, an organization about Shidduchim. And I did a Q&A, and one of the people asked if it's all right to lie about one's age. Because if they tell the truth, they're not getting any Shidduchim. So I said, look, the Shidduch is min hashamayim. Shidduch is from Hashem. All we have to do is ishtadlus. Is it possible to say that the ishtadlus that Hashem wants is that we should lie? When His signature is emes? That's the meaning of Chaysamay shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emes. For my veteran Talmidim, this is something that you heard from me before, so please forgive me for repeating it. But we know that Megillas Rus was written by one of the greatest Jews in the history of mankind. Megillas Rus was written by Shmuel HaNavi. It says, Moshe v'Aaron b'koyanav, u'Shmuel b'koyrei Shmai. It was written by Shmuel HaNavi. And after Rus converted, Shmuel still calls her Rus HaMoyaviyah, Rus the Moabite. Now that's very strange, because the Rambam paskins that when somebody converts, you're not supposed to mention about their past. So after she converted, why should Shmuel refer to her still as Rus HaMoyaviyah? She was Rus HaTzedekes, Rus HaYehudis, not Rus HaMoyaviyah. So the Medrash in Rus Rabbah asked this question and says that when Naomi asked Rus what happened in the fields of Boaz, Rus told the truth, but she switched around the chronological order. So Shmuel chastised this behavior and said, there's still some Moabite clinging to you. A Jew from birth would never prevaricate even in the order of what they are saying. This was the way of the old-time Jew. It says in Yirmiyah, we know we end Kriya Shema with this idea, but the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Hashem Elokim Emes. Hashem, our God, is truth. And therefore, if somebody distances themselves from the truth, they're distancing themselves from Hashem. That's a very important point. Now, the truth of the matter is for many people, lying is a convenient way to extricate themselves from a sticky situation. Your wife told you 10 times to bring something, and you didn't bring it. Now, if you'll say you forgot, so then the whole night she'll remind you, and the next 10 times she'll remind you, you know, I talk to you and you don't listen. Or if you don't write things down, you'll never remember it. Or what I say is not important. So therefore, it would be much easier to say they didn't have it in the store. You say they didn't have it in the store, so there's no problem. The problem is that that's very short-term thinking. Because it says, Eizou chacham haraya es hanoiled. Who is wise? Somebody who sees the future. A person that's wise knows that their lies will catch up to them. And then the person will never trust them, and the person will not have respect for them. If you look in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch has surprisingly a very short siman, a very short chapter on chinuch, on educating children. Very short chapter. But he has one piece where he writes that parents should discipline very heavily when they find their children lying. This is considered in Yiddishkeit a very, very big flaw. The MS is a trait that, we're told, V'alachta b'drachav, to walk in Hashem's ways. When it comes to MS, I've told you this in the past as well. One of Rav Moshe's greatest talmidim was Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt. Zech Tzadik Livracha Schusi Yogan Aleinu. The River V'Yis Ephraim. There are many volumes of the River V'Yis Ephraim. In it, he says that the olden Jew would ask certain shilas that today we would never think to ask. He was sent a shaila. Somebody was sending matzah from Eretz Yisrael to America, shmura matzah. And he was afraid that if he wrote on the package fragile matzah, the mailman wouldn't know what it is. So he wanted to write fragile glass. But he wanted to know, does that make a psul in the matzah? Because it's a lie. Who asked such a question? Well, here's another one. In Eretz Yisrael, they used to collect, they do today too. In Eretz Yisrael, a person gets married, they buy a dira. And the chassan side gives half, and the kala side gives half for the house. In this case, the kala had money, but the chassan didn't. So one of his friends wanted to go around to collect. Now the way to collect is to say, it's for achnasas kala. It's collecting for achnasas kala. But in this case, he was collecting for the chassan, not for the kala. He wanted to know if that's a lie. Another shaila that he brings down is that in some shuls, the shamish goes around with two pushkas, a pushka in each hand. Now, in certain shuls, like in Shomer Shabbos, one pushka is for tzedakah, one pushka is for kinyan svarim, one pushka is for the shul. But in certain shuls, both pushkas are for the shul. Is that being false? Is he going with two pushkas and they're both for the shul? Reb David Feinstein said that the old-time shamish, there used to be benches on either side, so you had two pushkas for each hand, so that when you walked down the benches, one was for one side of the benches and the other was for the other side of the benches. That's why they had two benches for the same purpose. But this is how a Jew is supposed to think about telling the truth. Now, in this week's parsha, we have two violations, two terrible violations. Maka ovi v'imai mois yumas. If somebody with Adam and Asra hits his father and mother and causes them a wound, it's a capital offense, they're put to death. And then it says, Mikalel avi v'imai. If he curses his father and mother, mois yumas, he's put to death. But there's a very strange thing. For Maka avi v'imai, for cursing his father and mother, the punishment is chenek, is strangulation. For cursing his father and mother, the punishment is much more severe. It's skila, which according to the Rabbanan is the most severe of the 4 death sentences. It's stoning. And it begs the question, when you slap a father and mother, chas v'shalom, you're doing an action. When you curse, it's only words, right? It's a lav shem b'maisa. So why is the curse that much more severe than hitting and causing a wound, punching? Why is curse stoning, and why is hitting strangulation? So the Rishonim have a lot to say about this question. There is a fundamental Ramban. This Ramban deserves a lot of thought and a lot of discussion, which is beyond the scope of the shir. But the Ramban says that the reason is because cursing is something that people who get upset do more frequently than hitting. And since something is done more frequently, it needs a greater deterrent. And therefore, that's why cursing is stoning, because since it's something that's more readily done, it needs the greater deterrent of stoning than hitting, which is enough with strangulation. So it's an interesting idea. What I said, it really needs to be pondered upon, that here we see that you could have a sin that's less severe, but because it's done more frequently, it needs a greater punishment as a greater deterrent. Something to think about. Now Rashi in Sanhedrin gives another answer. Rashi says that you're only chayiv for cursing parents if you curse them with Hashem's name. Oh, so then Rashi says that's why it's more severe. Because not only are you doing something wrong to your parents, but you're doing a sin with Hashem's name. So that's a kloin, that's a disgrace, not just to your parents, but also to Hashem. While hitting is only a disgrace to parents. That's Rashi's pshat. The Chizkuni says a little bit different. The Chizkuni says that we know that the kavod of Hashem and the kavod of parents are juxtaposed one to the other. I remember we said this last week, that God is the silent partner. And the way we treat our parents, that's the way we treat God. Cursing is possible to parents and to God. And therefore, that's more heinous than hitting, which is not possible by God, because God is not a physical creation. That's the explanation of the Chizkuni. The Meiri, these are all great Rishonim, the Meiri says that cursing is more severe because cursing is applicable even after death. You can't hit a parent after death. Hitting a corpse is nothing. But if you curse a parent after death, that's also a terrible sin. The Toras Chaim says that we see from this a very, very serious thing, and that is that the dead have shame even in the next world. And therefore cursing a parent causes shame and pain even in the next world. That means that, if a child strays from the path and their parents aren't alive, it's causing them pain in the next world. That's the Toras Chaim says that's what we learn from this. However, although all these explanations are very interesting, I did bring this up for what Rabbi Dr. Twersky has to say about this. he says that we see from here that verbal abuse can be more severe than physical abuse. Because that's what we see over here. That's verbal abuse. Iskila. Maka, that's physical abuse, is only strangulation. Skila is much more severe. You have to know that there's a pasuk in Mishlei. The pasuk in Mishlei says, Divrei nirgan kimislahamim. The words of the slander are like delectable items that people listen to. Vehem yordu chadrei beten. And the words of hurt about a person goes into the innermost chamber of their belly. The Gaon says from here, categorically, that many times verbal abuse is worse than physical abuse. And the pasuk says, a famous pasuk, Yesh boiter, there are people that utter words, they say unkind, hurtful, stinging, abusive words, kimat korais chorev. They're like the stabbing of a sword. That's what the pasuk says. And the Gaon says that we see from here that hurtful words can be worse than hitting. He says hitting, there is a refuah for the maki. You hit someone, maybe they'll have a swollen eye, maybe they'll even have a wound, but it will heal. But stinging words might never heal. You know? Stinging words remain sometime with their injury, the internal injury to the person's makeup. It remains their entire lives. People go to therapy for years to remove the inner injury from abusive words. The Gemara of Mitzvah tells us, right? Gedayla aynas dvarim me'aynas mamon. Greater is hurtful words that you would think that a pickpocket is a lot worse than somebody that just calls you names. Right? That's the way the world looks at it. A pickpocket, you know, we can't give him an aliyah. He says words, listen, he doesn't have such a control on himself. He was in a bad mood. But the Gemara says, categorically, the wallet can be returned. But those painful words, sometimes there never could be restitution for those words. That's what we find. Rabbi Tversky says, that's why we find over here that Mekalel Aviv V'imai is worse than Maka Aviv V'imai. This is a tremendously important lesson. We have to think 10 times before we say something unkind. It's especially to a wife. You know, you'll say, wife, wife, you know, what can you do, you know? Familiarity breeds contempt. But we committed ourselves not that way in the Ksuva. What does it say? Let's remember the Ksuva. Every time you go to a wedding, they read the Ksuva. It's not just for the Chas and the Kala, it's to remind us. Ana eflach v'oikir, I will work and I will honor, I will cherish. Not to say nasty words, not to say unkind words. That's a failing husband. That's a miserable husband. The pasuk says a law about the Hebrew slave who stole. Also, there's a din if he was impoverished and he was meicher atzmai. In begapo yavai, if he comes in alone, begapo yetze, he leaves alone. In other words, there is halacha that if one was sold because he was a bank robber, and the person who buys him for 6 years of service, he has to take in the criminal's wife and children and support his wife and children. But there's a halacha that he could give him a shivcha kananis. Normally a Jew is not allowed to marry a shivcha kananis, but he could give him a shivcha kananis and have children. Those children belong to the master. However, he could only give this Eved Ivri a shivcha kananis if he came in married. If he came in alone, in Begapai, with his guf, in Begapai Yavai, then Begapai Yetze, you're not allowed to give him a shivcha kananis. Now, why is that? So, the Rishonim tell us a selection of reasons. Taisus explains that if he wasn't married, and you give him the shivcha kananis, that would be his first wife, and his first love. And then after 6 years, he would have a hard time separating from her. That's the din. After 6 years, when he goes out, he can't continue living with her. Right? It stays with the owner, and the children stay with the owner. So therefore, since if he wouldn't be married, it would be hard for him to divest himself of her after 6 years, so you can't give him a shivcha knas, only if he was already married. So he has his love, and he has his own children. So then you could give him a shivcha knas. It won't be hard for him to separate from her after the 6 years. That's Taisus' pshat. There's another pshat in Taisus, which is a very logical pshat. And that is, why is the master allowed to give him a shivcha kananis? Because if the master paid for this Eved for his service, but now you're putting on top of him that he has to take care of the Eved's family, his wife, his children. Where is he going to get the money to do that? To offset that, we allow him to give her, the Eved, a shivcha and breed children, so he'll have slaves. And that will offset the price that he takes care of the wife and children. If, however, the person comes in alone and there's no wife and children to take care of, then the Adain, the master, doesn't have a reason to give a shivcha knas because there's no money that needs to be offset. That's Taisus' second shot, which is a very understandable pshat. The Parneach Raza, and it shows you how the Torah considers all angles. The Parneach Raza says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid a completely different reason. The Parneach Raza says, we're afraid that if this man who stole was a bacher, or he sold himself was a bacher, we're afraid that he might have, since he's not married, he might have passed by this wealthy Jew and seen a very pretty Goyish shivcha. And he might have had a desire, because he's not married, he might have had a desire for her. And maybe that's why he stole, or that's why he sold himself, in order to marry her. Therefore we say, if he's a bacher, you can't give him a shivcha kananis. We don't want that to happen. We don't want that to transpire. This is the way the Torah knows human emotions. Pasuk says, "V'nikriv balabayis Elohim." In this case, it's Elohim, because it's talking about that the person goes to the judge im lo yishalach yadai b'meleches re'ehu, to say that he didn't misappropriate his friend's item. Now this means that if, let's say, I give Eddie my beautiful esrog box to watch, and I come back, it's a pikadon, and I come back and I ask Eddie, where is it? So Eddie says it was stolen. So then, Menikra Balabayas Elo Elohim, Eddie comes to the judge to take an oath that he didn't misappropriate my esrog box. That's the simple meaning of the pasuk. But the great Reb Meir Mipremezhlan, we know that the Torah is Nidreshes B'Shivim Panim in 70 different ways. And Reb Meir Mipremezhlan, Zechatzad Lebrachas Chutzi Yagaleinu, says that there's another completely different idea in this pasuk. A balabayas is a Pashut Yid. Right? He's just a balabayas. We call him. It's one of the, just one of the balabatim. But v'nikra balabayas el Elokim. A plain Pashut Yid could get close to Hashem. You know how? Even if he hasn't been learning and he doesn't say Tillim and he doesn't daven so good. If he doesn't mess around with somebody else's property, if he has integrity, if he's honest, such a person is close to Hashem. You know, the first thing, the Gemara in Shabbos says Hashem will ask us a lot of questions. The first thing that Hashem will ask us after 120 is Nasata v'nasata be'emunah. Did you do business with integrity? Did you do business faithfully? That's the first thing that the Rabbeinu Shalom is going to ask. You know, in the Yom that we say on Yom Rishon, what do we say? Neki kapayim uvar levav. One who is of clean palms and an honest heart. Yisa baracha me'es Hashem. You know, to tell you a story that depicts this kind of integrity. In 1948, during the War of Independence, when it was hot and heavy, there were severe water shortages in Yerushalayim. Severe water shortages. It was so bad that we take for granted. I don't drink water from the faucet. I only drink bottled water. But I only drink fancy bottled water. I only drink sparkling bottled water. But at that time in 1948, there were water dispensing stations where if you needed water, you had to wait online for water at the water dispensing station. And you had a proof how many children you had in the family, and you got a certain amount of water. You had to schlep buckets back home. So the Rebbetzin of Rav Issa Zalman Meltzer went to get the water. When she came home, she asked her husband to help her up with the buckets. Rav Issa Zalman said, I can't take the water unless you tell me clearly that you didn't go ahead in the line. Because time is money. You have to tell me that you didn't go ahead in the line. So Rabbi Issa Zalman Meltzer wanted to make sure he had Neki Kapayim. Now today we do give privileges to our leaders, and that's an accepted practice because we pay our leaders very, very little. And therefore, since we pay them very little, we give them privileges. We exempt them from certain payments. Maybe it might be tuitions, it might be presents at simchas, it might be different things that we exempt our leaders because of the fact that they make so little. And by the way, there is biblical source for this. The Kohanim and the Leviim that served Klal Yisrael were subsidized. They weren't out working the farm. They weren't out having tanneries or wineries or vineyards because they were busy with karbanos. They were busy doing the work of the community. Now, even though a kohen only worked in the Beis Hamikdash once in 24 weeks, there were 24 mishmaros. But the kohen also had a spiritual responsibility to Klal Yisrael. That's what we found on Hanukkah, that it was the Kohanim that saved the spirituality of Klal Yisrael. So therefore we subsidize the Kohanim. We give them Chav Dalid Matanos. There are 24 Matanos to the Kohanim. Not just the Truma, not just the Trumas Meiser. There's Royal Chayayim Vakeva, there's Reishis Hagez. There are many things that we do. 24 matanas, we give them a portion of the chatas, we give them a portion of the shlamim, we give them a portion of the toda. Why? Because they're servicing Klal Yisrael and they're not getting paid for their work. The pasuk says, before I can, wow, it's already 56 minutes, I can't believe it. And by the way, don't forget, after the Chumash, we still have to do the Mishnah Yomis. Don't let me forget what a full night we have tonight. But I also want to remind you that we are looking for sponsors for Shiurim. If you want to sponsor a share, it's coming in very slowly these days. If you want to sponsor a share, 718-916-3100. You could text me, 718-916-3100. You want to sponsor one of my shiurim in Florida, RMMWSI, Rabbi Moshe Meir Weiss, Staten Island, at AOL.com. The pasuk says, V'rapo yirape, you should surely cure. Rashi says, Mikan shenitein reshus l'roifei l'rafe. So here we see that a doctor could heal. This is a very obvious question. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that a doctor could heal? The Gemara tells us that healing a person is a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. So just like if a person was drowning, you have to save them from drowning. So you would have to save a person if you know how to cure tonsillitis, if you know how to cure a strep throat. So healing them is a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Why do we need a pasuk of V'rapo Yirape? It's a big kasha. Taisus asks this kasha in Masechtas Brachas. Taisus gives an interesting. Taisus asks, not only is it a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, it's also a mitzvah of Lo Samoid al Dam Re'echa. Don't stand over your friend's blood. So, why do I need the pasuk of V'rapo Yirape? So Taisus says, I might think that where are you allowed to heal somebody? If the person gets a splinter, if the person went outside, it was cold, he wasn't careful, he got a sore throat, or somebody injured him. But if a person got sick on his own, I might think that that was the will of God, and to heal him is going against the will of God. Hashem made him sick, and now you're healing him, you're going against the will of God. The person instead should pray to Hashem and do tshuva and go to a chacham, but maybe a doctor shouldn't heal him. So therefore the pasuk says, no, V'rapo Yirape, Hashem wants you to heal him. That's Taisvus's teretz. It's interesting that there's another teretz to this kasha. It's also in Taisvus, and it's also Aponim Yafas. And that is that if the pasuk didn't say Rapo Yirape, I would think, yeah, you have to heal somebody, but you can't charge. Because the din is when you return somebody's lost article, you can't hold out your hands and say, pay me. If I find your wallet and it has $3,000 in it, and I return it to you, I can't hold out my hand and say, give me 10%, or give me the time it took for me to travel to your house. I can't do that. So I might think, therefore, says Taisvus, that a doctor, he's doing Hashavas Aveda, he's not allowed to charge. He's not allowed to charge for the procedure. He's not allowed to charge for the visit. Therefore, V'rapa Yerape tells us that you're allowed to charge. That's the second shot in Taisus, and that's what the Param Yafas says. However, I remember Rav Moshe Heinemann speaking to doctors. Rav Moshe Heinemann said, you know, that really you're not allowed to charge for being a doctor, because it's Hashavas Aveda. He says, what's the reason why you're allowed to charge? He doesn't say Taisus is Pshat. Rather, he says, like the Tur in Yoredeya, Siman Shin Lamed Vav, which is from the Ramban, the reason why you're allowed to charge is because the din is that you're allowed to charge schar bittel. That means you're allowed to charge because you could have been doing something else at the time. And since a doctor could have been doing the same procedure on a guy, and on a guy there's no mitzvah hashavas aveda, so he could have charged the guy. So therefore, now that he's doing it for a Jew, he's losing out on doing it for a guy. Therefore, he could charge the money of the procedure. So it's not because of the pasuk of V'rapa Yerape. So it's a machlokes between Taisus and the Ramban. And by the way, that's also the reason by learning. Now we know that you're not supposed to charge for learning. It says, Mishtamesh b'soga chalaf. If a person uses the crown of Torah, it passes away. But by Torah also you could charge schar bittel. And therefore, if the rabbi at the time could be a doctor, if the rabbi at the time could be a lawyer, if the rabbi at the time could be a tennis instructor, so then he could charge schar bittel. That's why today we pay rabbanim. People say, oh, the rabbis, they're not supposed to take money. Torah is compared to the midbar, just like the midbar is free, so Torah is free. The answer is yes, but a Rav, and that's why it became popular over the last several hundred years for rabbanim to have salaries. And they should, because if they don't, so then you make their children into paupers, and then their children won't be able to do good shidduchim, and their wives will suffer, and then people won't want to be rabbis. That's what happened. It used to be that a rebbeim in school would be paid very shabbily, and they would be paid very late, and then we ended up with very substandard rabbanim, and therefore the Olam finally realized, hey, listen, if we want to have good rebbeim, we better pay them correctly. So Baruch Hashem, there's been an upgrade in how we pay the rebbeim. Same thing is true rabbanim as well. If we want the best of our people to become rabbanim, we have to make sure that they get compensated properly. Otherwise, we're left with the people that can't do the other stuff. We want to thank you very much for joining us and wish you a wonderful evening and a wonderful Shabbos. But stay tuned, Rabbi Isai, as we're going to learn now the Mishnah Yomis.